Hello, I'm Anthony Hughes, and this video signifies the end of the first section of my series all about playback here in Dorico. Up to this point, ultimately, it's all been about playback templates, what they are, understanding all the different building blocks, and how they connect with the notation in your score and use it to drive playback in Dorico. In future videos, I'll go deeper into some of the more advanced topics, and I'll show you how to work with various different sound libraries, as they can all have their own ways of doing things. For now though, in this video, I'm going to create a couple of playback templates so we can start to become more comfortable with the process. And if you're actually joining me here for the first time, hopefully you can still play along and then jump back to any of the earlier videos if something doesn't make sense. Let's do it. For this first example, I'm going to show you how to create a playback template that replaces just one instrument sound in the default Dorico setup. Let's say I'm quite happy with how Dorico playback sounds by default, but I'm a pianos guy and I find that I'm always reaching for Steinberg's Eagle sound library whenever I write for piano. So I'd like Dorico to load a specific Eagle preset whenever I add a piano to a project. Let's start a new project using the piano solo template. We don't need to set any other details here. Switch to play mode and find the routing information for the piano track. Because we're dealing with just one instrument here and the Eagle library also runs inside Halion Sonic, we can keep this instance of the VST and just replace the loaded sound. Click Show Instrument and then use the Media Bay browser to find a sound. Note that I have several of Steinberg's other libraries installed, so you might have a different list here. I'll navigate to the Eagle library and replace the currently loaded sound with my preferred preset. Back in Dorico, because I'm using the same slot in Halion, the port and channels stay the same. We're currently using the default expression map. Let's just take a look at that. Because a piano preset doesn't require a huge amount of control beyond just playing the notes, this is fine for our needs. We don't need any key switches, and controlling volume dynamic with note velocity is correct for a piano. So we can keep using the same expression map, which is great. Click the cog button to open the Endpoint setup dialog. We can confirm we have just the piano here on channel 1. Press the Save Endpoint Configuration button and give it a name that clearly identifies the instrument or instruments referenced. I'll go with Eagle Piano. We can close the dialog and then go to the Play menu and open Playback Templates. Because essentially we want to keep the default playback setup but just change the piano sound, I'll start with the full Dorico Pro playback template and duplicate it. This opens a new playback template in the editor, and we can see the automatic entry that handles all the playback for Iconica Sketch, Halion Symphony Orchestra, Groove Agent SE, and so on. Give the new playback template an easily identifiable name, something like Default plus Eagle Piano, or whatever works for you. Click Add Manual and choose the endpoint configuration we just saved. You may remember in the last video, we were talking about how Dorico approaches this list from the top. So it will check to see if an instrument is accounted for in the first entry before looking to the second. In this case, a piano is defined in that default configuration. So Dorico will use that and never get as far as looking at our new playback configuration. We need to move our Eagle piano above the auto configuration so that it gets used. Any other instrument in our project will pass through and use the main default configuration. With that set, press OK to confirm our changes. It's time to test our new playback template. Let's set it as the default in Preferences at the top of the play page. This means it'll be used for all new projects. So I'll create one, selecting a template that contains a piano. Once loaded, switch to play mode, and we can see that while the other instruments are using the same sounds that they always have, the piano is using the Eagle preset that we defined in the playback template. Let's look at a second example. This time, I'm going to use the Berlin Woodwinds library by Orchestral Tools. I've created a new project and added some wind instruments. The sound library is for soloists, so I've added single players. In play mode, select the VST and MIDI panel and add a new VST, selecting the Orchestral Tools sine player. Navigate to the correct library and drag the instruments over to be loaded. I'm setting this up for flute, oboe, and clarinet, and can load all of these into one instance of sine player, into channels 1, 2, and 3. Select the track inspector and route the Dorico instruments to the sine player, ensuring you set the correct channel for each. Next, I need to create expression maps for these endpoints, review the list of articulations, and note their relevant key switches. Back in Dorico, create an expression map with key switches for each of those preset articulations, assigning them to playback techniques and setting the best method for controlling volume dynamics. Often when creating expression maps, you have to make a decision about which notations you would like to trigger which of the sound presets, techniques, and articulations. For example, the Berlin Woodwind library instruments have these long and short portato articulations that I would like to use. I think for the long portato sound, I'm going to create a switch that's triggered by tenuto articulations. For the short portato sound, I would like this to be used when there are slurred staccato notes. I can achieve this by creating a new bass switch with combined techniques. Search for legato and click the menu item to select it, and then search for staccato and click to select that one as well. You can see here that we're adding legato plus staccato. You can also hold Control, and that's Command on Mac, to make these sorts of multiple selections. Set the key switch, and now save the expression map and select it for the flute instrument. When we add these notations to the score, we can see the correct playback techniques being triggered. So, choose what you think works best for the available sounds in your libraries. Looking back at the sine player, we can see that the oboe and clarinet key switches are identical and the same as the flute, other than this final G-sharp articulation. This means I can duplicate the flute expression map, rename to include oboe and clarinet, and then just change that G-sharp switch. Then I assign the same expression map to both instruments. Now that all three instruments are ready, I can check the endpoint setup, set the number of MIDI channels to 3 to remove those that aren't in use, and click to save an endpoint configuration. Let's now use this endpoint configuration to make a new playback template. Create a new blank template, give it a name, and add the Berlin Woodwind soloists manual endpoint configuration. And while we're at it, let's also include our Eagle piano configuration. Because one of these is for flute, oboe, and clarinet, and the other is for piano, there are no instrument conflicts, so it doesn't matter which order they are placed. I'm going to save this Dorico project because I can use it in the future to make changes to the endpoint configuration. Let's test the playback template. This project has piano, some wind instruments, and strings. In the playback templates dialog, I'll apply the new playback template. The piano and wind instruments have indeed loaded their sounds correctly. However, because I did not add an endpoint configuration that catered for strings, these instruments have no sounds loaded for them. I need to edit the playback template to include a fallback. Let's use the default Dorico Pro configuration. This way, any instruments not included in either of my manual configurations will still have sounds loaded. While we're here, if you click the Endpoint Configurations button at the bottom of the dialog, you're shown a list of available configurations, and selecting Berlin Woodwind soloists shows how this contains a sine player setup with these 3 single players. This means if I add a section player to the project and give it a flute, it'll not use the Berlin Woodwind library, but rather the Iconica Sketch flute preset defined in the automatic endpoint configuration we set as the fallback. If you want to edit your endpoint configuration, reopen the project you used to create it in the first place. This is why we made sure to save it. In this case, I've expanded the setup to include the alto flute and English horn presets included in the library. Save the endpoint configuration again, ensuring you use the exact same name. You can select it from the drop-down menu to make that easier. You'll be warned that you're overwriting an existing file. Please make doubly sure that you select the correct one. And now any playback template that includes the endpoint configuration will use your updated settings. One final example for now. I'd like to make a playback template for this Spitfire library, where each instrument is loaded into its own instance of the VST player. I've made all of the expression maps and routed the instruments correctly. In the VST and MIDI panel, I can click to save one endpoint configuration for all of these individual endpoint setups, and then create a playback template directly from that. It's still a good idea to set a fallback just in case you need to use any instrument other than the ones in that sound library. And that's creating playback templates here in Dorico. The process may seem complicated at first, but that's because the system needs to have the flexibility to conform to any sound library you wish to use with Dorico, and to be able to connect to all of the dozens of musical notations and markings that you might wish to use in your projects. Once you understand it, though, you'll love the power it can bring to playback in your Dorico projects. Next in this tutorial series, I'll delve a little deeper into some of the more advanced features of expression maps, the different kinds of switches you can use, more detailed control of volume dynamics, overriding playback options, and more. Look out for these videos coming soon. In the meantime, I do hope this video has been useful for you. Please click the like button if you've enjoyed it, and do consider subscribing to our channel, clicking the bell to be notified about our new videos. I'm Anthony Hughes. Thanks for watching.